Boris Godunov is an opera by Modest Mussorgsky. The work was composed between 1868 and 1873 in Saint Petersburg, Russia. It is Mussorgsky's only completed opera and is considered his masterpiece. Its subjects are the Russian ruler Boris Godunov, who reigned as Tsar during the time of troubles, and his nemesis, the False Dmitriy. The Russian-language libretto was written by the composer, and is based on the drama Boris Godunov by Aleksandr Pushkin, and, in the revised version of 1872, on Nikolay Karamzin's History of the Russian State. Boris Godunov, among major operas, shares with Giuseppe Verdi's Don Carlos the distinction of having the most complex creative history and the greatest wealth of alternative material. The composer created two versions: the original version of 1869, which was rejected for production by the Imperial Theatres, and the revised version of 1872, which received its first performance in 1874 in St. Petersburg. These versions constitute two distinct ideological conceptions, not two variations of a single plan. Boris Godunov has seldom been performed in either of the two forms left by the composer, frequently being subjected to cuts, recomposition, reorchestration, transposition of scenes, or conflation of the original and revised versions. Several composers, chief among them Nikolay Rimsky-Korsakov and Dmitry Shostakovich, have created new editions of the opera to correct perceived technical weaknesses in the composer's original scores. Although these versions held the stage for decades, Mussorgsky's individual harmonic style and orchestration are now valued for their originality, and revisions by other hands have fallen out of fashion. Boris Godunov comes closer to the status of a repertory piece than any other Russian opera, even Tchaikovsky's Eugene Onegin, and is the most recorded Russian opera. History, composition history, note, dates provided in this article for events taking place in Russia before 1918 are old style. By the close of 1868, Mussorgsky had already started and abandoned two important opera projects: the antique, exotic, romantic tragedy Salam Bar, written under the influence of Alexander Serev's Judith, and the contemporary, Russian, anti-romantic farce Marriage, influenced by Alexander Zhsky's The Stone Guest. Mussorgsky's next project would be a very original and successful synthesis of the opposing styles of these two experiments: the romantic lyrical style of Salam Bar, and the realistic style of Marriage. In the autumn of 1868, Vladimir Nikolsky, a professor of Russian history and language, and an authority on Pushkin, suggested to Mussorgsky the idea of composing an opera on the subject of Pushkin's dramatic chronicle Boris Godunov. Boris the play, modelled on Shakespeare's histories, was written in 1825 and published in 1831, but was not approved for performance by the state censors until 1866, almost 30 years after the author's death. Production was permitted on condition that certain scenes were cut. Although enthusiasm for the work was high, Mussorgsky faced a seemingly insurmountable obstacle to his plans in that an imperial ukaz of 1837 forbade the portrayal in opera of Russian tsars. Original version: when Lyudmila Shestakova, the sister of Mikhail Glinka, learned of Mussorgsky's plans, she presented him with a volume of Pushkin's dramatic works, interleaved with blank pages and bound, and using this, Mussorgsky began work in October 1868 preparing his own libretto. Pushkin's drama consists of 25 scenes, written predominantly in blank verse. Mussorgsky adapted the most theatrically effective scenes, mainly those featuring the title character, along with a few other key scenes, often preserving Pushkin's verses. Mussorgsky worked rapidly, composing first the vocal score in about 9 months, and completed the full score 5 months later, at the same time working as a civil servant. In 1870, he submitted the libretto to the state censor for examination, and the score to the literary and music committees of the Imperial Theatres. However, the opera was rejected by a vote of 6-1, ostensibly for its lack of an important female role. Lyudmila Shestakova recalled the reply made by conductor Eduardna Pravnike and stage manager Gennady Kondratyev of the Mariinsky Theatre in response to her question of whether Boris had been accepted for production. "No," they answered me, "it's impossible." How can there be an opera without the feminine element? Mussorgsky has great talent beyond doubt. Let him add one more scene. Then Boris will be produced. Other questionable accounts, such as Rimsky-Korsakov's, allege that there were additional reasons for rejection, such as the work's novelty. Mussorgsky submitted his completed Borís Godunov to the board of directors of the Imperial Theatres. The freshness and originality of the music nonplussed the honorable members of the committee, who reproved the composer, among other things, for the absence of a reasonably important female role. All his closest friends, including myself, although moved to enthusiasm by the superb dramatic power and genuinely national character of the work, had constantly been pointing out to him that it lacked many essentials, and that despite the beauties with which it teemed, it might be found unsatisfactory in certain respects. For a long time he stood up for his creation, the fruit of his inspiration and meditations. He yielded only after Boris had been rejected, the management finding that it contained too many choruses and ensembles, whereas individual characters had too little to do. This rejection proved very beneficial to Boris. Meanwhile, Pushkin's drama finally received its first performance in 1870 at the Mariinsky Theatre, 3 years in advance of the premiere of the opera in the same venue, using the same scene designs by Matvei Shishkov that would be recycled in the opera. Revised version, in 1871, Mussorgsky set about recasting and expanding the opera with enthusiasm, ultimately going beyond the requirements of the Directorate of the Imperial Theatres, which called simply for the addition of a female role and a scene to contain it. Nevertheless, he added 3 scenes, cut one, and recomposed another. The modifications resulted in the addition of an important prima donna role, the expansion of existing female roles, and the expansion of the first tenor role. Mussorgsky augmented his adaptation of Pushkin's drama with his own lyrics, assisted by a study of the monumental history of the Russian state by Karamzin, to whom Pushkin's drama is dedicated. The revised version was finished in 1872, and submitted to the Imperial Theatres in the autumn. Most Mussorgsky biographers claim that the Directorate of the Imperial Theatres also rejected the revised version of Boris Godunov, even providing a date, May 6, 1872, or October 29, 1872. Recent researchers point out that there is insufficient evidence to support this claim, emphasizing that in his revision Mussorgsky had rectified the only objection the Directorate is known to have made. In any case, Mussorgsky's friends took matters into their own hands, arranging the performance of 3 scenes at the Mariinsky Theatre on February 5, 1873, as a benefit for stage manager Gennady Kondratyev. Copyright Tsarkovy's review noted the audience's enthusiasm. The success was enormous and complete. Never, within my memory, had such ovations been given to a composer at the Mariinsky. The success of this performance led V. Bessel and Company to announce the publication of the piano vocal score of Mussorgsky's opera, issued in January 1874. Premiere. The triumphant 1873 performance of 3 scenes paved the way for the first performance of the opera, which was accepted for production on October 22, 1873. The premiere took place on January 27, 1874, as a benefit for prima donna Yulia Platonova. The Mariinsky Theatre was sold out, and the performance was a great success with the public. Mussorgsky had to take some 20 curtain calls. Students sang choruses from the opera in the street. This time, however, the critical reaction was exceedingly hostile. See critical reception in this article for details. Initial performances of Boris Godunov featured significant cuts. The entire cell scene was cut from the first performance, not, as is often supposed, due to censorship, but because Napravnik wished to avoid a lengthy performance, and frequently cut episodes he felt were ineffective. Later performances tend to be even more heavily cut, including the additional removal of the chroma scene, likely for political reasons. After protracted difficulties in obtaining the production of his opera, Mussorgsky was compliant with Napravnik's demands, and even defended these mutilations to his own supporters. Presently cuts were made in the opera, the splendid scene near chroma was omitted. Some 2 years later, the Lord knows why, productions of the opera ceased altogether, although it had enjoyed uninterrupted success, and the performances under Petrov and, after his death, by F. I. Stravinsky, Platonova, and Komisarzyevsky had been excellent. There were rumors afloat that the opera had displeased the imperial family. There was gossip that its subject was unpleasant to the censors. The result was that the opera was stricken from the repertory. Boris Godunov was performed 21 times during the composer's lifetime, and 5 times after his death before being withdrawn from the repertory on November 8, 1882. When Mussorgsky's subsequent opera Kovanchkina was rejected for production in 1883, the Imperial Opera Committee reputedly said, "One radical opera by Mussorgsky is enough." Boris Godunov did not return to the stage of the Mariinsky Theatre until November 9, 1904, when the Rimsky-Korsakov edition was presented under conductor Felix Blumenfeld with bass Fyodor Shaliapin in the title role. Boris Godunov and the imperial family. The reports of the antipathy of the imperial family to Mussorgsky's opera were supported by the following accounts by Platonova and Stasov. During the premiere, after the scene by the fountain, Grand Duke Konstantin Nikolaevich, a devoted friend of mine, but by the calumny of the conservatory members, the sworn enemy of Mussorgsky, approached me during the intermission with the following words: "And you like this music so much that you chose this opera for a benefit performance?" "I like it, Your Highness," I answered. "Then I am going to tell you that this is a shame to all Russia, and not an opera." He screamed, almost foaming at the mouth, and then turning his back, he stomped away from me. In the entire audience, I think only Konstantin Nikolaevich was unhappy. It was not so much the fault of the music as that of the libretto, where the folk scenes, the riot, the scene where the police officer beats the people with his stick so that they cry out begging Boris to accept the throne, and so forth, were jarring to some people and infuriated them. There was no end to applause and curtain calls. When the list of operas for the winter was presented to His Majesty the Emperor, he, with his own hand, was pleased to strike out Boris with a wavy line in blue pencil. Performance history. Note: this section lists performance data for the St. Petersburg and Moscow premieres of each important version, the first performance of each version abroad, and premieres in English-speaking countries. Dates provided for events taking place in Russia before 1918 are old style. Original interpreters: 1872, St. Petersburg. Euro excerpts. The coronation scene was performed on February 5, 1872 by the Russian Music Society, conducted by Duadno Pravnik. The Polonaise from Act 3 was performed on April 3, 1872 by the Free School of Music, conducted by Mily Balakirev. 1873, St. Petersburg. Euro 3 scenes from the opera Euro the Inn scene, the scene in Marina's boudoir, and the fountain scene Euro were performed on February 5, 1873 at the Mariinsky Theatre. Duadno Pravnik conducted. The cast included Daria Leonova, Fyodor Komisarzyevsky, Osip Petrov, Vasily Vasilyev, Mikhail Zayoti, Yulia Platonova, Joseph Palyaek, and Felix Pszczyszewski. 1874, St. Petersburg. Euro world premiere. The revised version of 1872 received its world premiere on January 27, 1874 at the Mariinsky Theatre. The Self scene was omitted. The Novodevichy and coronation scenes were combined into one continuous scene, the call of Boris to the Tsardom. Matvei Shishkov's design for the last scene of Pushkin's drama, The House of Boris, was substituted for this hybrid of the Novodevichy and coronation scenes. The scenes were grouped in 5 acts as follows: Act 1, The Call of Boris to the Tsardom and Inn; Act 2, with Tsar Boris; Act 3, Marina's boudoir and at the fountain; Act 4, The Death of Boris; Act 5, The Pretender Neochroma. Production personnel included Gennady Kondratyev, Ivan Pomazornsky, Matvei Shishkov, Mikhail Bokharov, and Ivan Andreyev, and Vasily Prokhorov. Duadno Pravnik conducted. The cast included Ivan Melnikov, Alexandra Krutikova, Wilhelmina Raab, Olga Shyoda, Vasily Vasilyev, Vasilyev II, Vladimir Sobolov, Vladimir Vasilyev, Vasilyev I, Fyodor Komisarzyevsky, Yulia Platonova, Joseph Paliak, Osip Petrov, Pavel Dyazikov, Antonina Baranova, Pavel Bulakov, Mikhail Zayoti, Lyudov, Sobolov, Matveyev, and Sobolov. The production ran for 26 performances over 9 years. The premiere established traditions that have influenced subsequent Russian productions. 1. Cuts made to shorten what is perceived as an overlong work. 2. Declamatory and histrionic singing by the title character, often degenerating in climactic moments into shouting. And 3. Realistic and historically accurate sets and costumes, employing very little stylization. 1879, St. Petersburg Euro cell scene. The cell scene was first performed on January 16, 1879 in Kononov Hall, at a concert of the Free School of Music, in the presence of Mussorgsky. Nikolay Rimsky-Korsakov conducted. The cast included Vladimir Vasilyev, Vasilyev I, and Vasily Vasilyev, Vasilyev II. 1888, Moscow Euro Bolshoi Theatre premiere. The revised version of 1872 received its Moscow premiere on December 16, 1888 at the Bolshoi Theatre. The sullen chroma scenes were omitted. Production personnel included Anton Bartzel, and Karl Waltz. Ippolit Altani conducted. The cast included Bogomir Kosov, Nadezhda Selina, Alexandra Karataeva, O. Pavlova, Anton Bartzel, Pyotr Figurov, Ivan Butenko, Lavrentiy Donskoy, Mary Klementova, Pavel Borisov, Vladimir Strelitsky, Mikhail Mikhailov, Vera Gnacheva, and Alexander Donov. The production ran for 10 performances. 1896, St. Petersburg Euro premiere of the Rimsky-Korsakov edition. The Rimsky-Korsakov edition premiered on November 28, 1896 in the Great Hall of the St. Petersburg Conservatory. Nikolay Rimsky-Korsakov conducted. The cast included Mikhail Lunacharsky, Gavril Morskoy, Nikolay Gdrov, and Fyodor Stravinsky. The production ran for 4 performances. 1898, Moscow Euro Fyodor Shaliapin as Boris. Bass Fyodor Shaliapin first appeared as Boris on December 7, 1898 at the Solodovnikov Theatre in a private Russian opera production. The Rimsky-Korsakov edition of 1896 was performed. Production personnel included Sava Mamentov, and Mikhail Lentovsky. Giuseppe Truffi conducted. The cast also included Anton Sekorotsansky, Serafina Selyuk-Rosatovskaya, Varvara Strakhova, and Vasily Shkarfa. The production ran for 14 performances. 1908, Paris a Euro first performance outside Russia. The Rimsky-Korsakov edition of 1908 premiered on May 19, 1908 at the Paris Opera Copyright Ra. The cell scene preceded the coronation scene, the inn scene and the scene in Marina's boudoir were omitted, the fountain scene preceded the Terem scene, and the chroma scene preceded the death scene. Production personnel included Sergei Diagilov, Alexandr Sanin, Alexandr Gulovin, Konstantin Yuon, Alexandr Benua, and Yevgeny Lancer, Ulrika Vrenek, and Ivan Bilibin. Flix Blumenfeld conducted. The cast included Fyodor Shaliapin, Klavdia Tugaranova, Dagmara Renina, Yelizaveta Petrenko, Ivan Alkovsky, Nikolay Gdrov, Vladimir Kaspersky, Dmitry Smirnov, Natalia Yarmolenko-Yazina, Vasily Sharonov, Vasily Doverin Kravchenko, Mitrofan Shupra Nnikov, and Christopher Tokakov. The production ran for 7 performances. 1913, New York Euro United States premiere. The United States premiere of the 1908 Rimsky-Korsakov edition took place on March 19, 1913 at the Metropolitan Opera, and was based on Sergei Diagilov's Paris production. The opera was presented in 3 acts. The cell scene preceded the coronation scene, the scene in Marina's boudoir was omitted, and the chroma scene preceded the death scene. However, the inn scene, which was omitted in Paris, was included. Scenery and costume designs were the same as used in Paris in 1908, a Euro made in Russia by Gulovin, Benua, and Bilibin, and shipped from Paris. The opera was sung in Italian. Arturo Toscanini conducted. The cast included Adamo Dida, Anna Case, Lenra Sparks, Maria Ducciani, Angelo Bada, Vincenzo Resciglione, Jan Moburg, La copyright on Rothia, Paul Althaus, Louise Homer, Andra copyright Esther Segurola, Pietro Ordisio, Albert Race, Giulio Rossi, Leopoldo Mariani, and Louis Criolla. 1913, London United Kingdom premiere. The United Kingdom premiere of the 1908 Rimsky-Korsakov edition took place on June 24, 1913 at the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane in London. Production personnel included Sergei Diaghilev and Alexandr Sanin. Emil Cooper conducted. The cast included Fyodor Shalyapin, Maria Davidova, Mary O'Brien, Yelizaveta Petrenko, Nikolay Andreyev, Aya Dogonards, Pavel Andreyev, Vasily Demaev, Yelena Nikolaeva, Alexandr Belyanin, Nikolay Bolshakov, Alexander Alexandrovich, and Kapiton Zaporozhets. 1927, Moscow St. Basil's Scene. The newly published St. Basil's Scene was performed on January 18, 1927 at the Bolshoi Theatre in the 1926 revision by Mikhail Ippolitov Ivanov, commissioned in 1925 to accompany the Rimsky-Korsakov edition. Production personnel included Vladimir Lossky and Fyodor Fedorovsky. Ariy Pazovsky conducted. The cast included Ivan Kozlovsky and Leonid Sevrunsky. The production ran for 144 performances. 1928, Leningrad world premiere of the 1869 original version. The original version of 1869 premiered on February 16, 1928 at the State Academic Theatre of Opera and Ballet. Production personnel included Sergei Radlov and Vladimir Dmitriev. Vladimir Dranishnikov conducted. The cast included Mark Reason, Alexander Kabanov, Ivan Bolshakov, Nikolay Peshkovsky, Pavel Zhuravlenko, Yekaterina Sabinina, and V.T. 1935, London first performance of the 1869 original version outside Russia. The first performance of the 1869 original version abroad took place on September 30, 1935 at the Sadler's Wells Theatre. The opera was sung in English. Lawrence Collingwood conducted. The cast included Ronald Steer. 1959, Leningrad first performance of the Shostakovich Orchestration. The premiere of the Shostakovich Orchestration of 1940 of Pavel Lamb's vocal score took place on November 4, 1959 at the Kirov Theatre. Sergei Yeltsin conducted. The cast included Boris Godunov. Publication history, versions. Note: musicologists do not agree on the terms used to refer to the two authorial versions of Boris Godunov. Editors Pavel Lam and Boris Asafyev used preliminary redaction and principal redaction for the first and second versions, respectively, and David Lloyd-Jones designated them initial and definitive. This article, aiming for utmost objectivity, uses original and revised. 1869 original version. The original version of 1869 is rarely heard. It is distinguished by its greater fidelity to Pushkin's drama and its almost entirely male cast of soloists. It also conforms to the recitative opera style of The Stone Guest and Marriage, and to the ideals of Pushkist realism, which include fidelity to text, formlessness, and emphasis on the values of spoken theatre, especially through naturalistic declamation. The unique features of this version include, the uncut Novodevishye scene, which concludes with an additional people's scene, Pimen's narrative of the scene of the murder of Dmitry Ivanovich, the original Terem scene, which follows Pushkin's text more closely than does the revised version. The scene The Cathedral of Vasily the Blessed, Shchelkalov's address, the terse Terem scene of the 1869 version and the unrelieved tension of the two subsequent and final scenes make this version more dramatically effective to some critics. 1872 revised version. The revised version of 1872 represents a retreat from the ideals of Pushkist realism, which had come to be associated with comedy, toward a more exalted, tragic tone, and a conventionally operatic style, a trend that would be continued in the composer's next opera, Kovanchkina. This version is longer, is richer in musical and theatrical variety, and balances naturalistic declamation with more lyrical vocal lines. The unique features of this version include 2 new off-stage choruses of monks in the otherwise abbreviated cell scene, the Innkeeper's Song of the Drake, the revised Terem scene, which presents the title character in a more tragic and melodramatic light, and includes new songs and new musical themes borrowed from Salamba, the conventionally operatic Polish act. The novel Final Scene of Anarchy. Mussorgsky rewrote the Terem scene for the 1872 version, modifying the text, adding new songs and plot devices, modifying the psychology of the title character, and virtually recomposing the music of the entire scene. This version has made a strong comeback in recent years, and has become the dominant version. 1874 Piano Vocal Score. The piano vocal score of 1874 was the first published form of the opera, and is essentially the 1872 version with some minor musical variants and small cuts. The 1874 vocal score does not constitute a third version, but rather a refinement of the 1872 revised version. Scene structure. The distribution of scenes in the authorial versions is as follows. Upon revising the opera, Mussorgsky initially replaced the St. Basil's scene with the chroma scene. However, on the suggestion of Vladimir Nikolay, he transposed the order of the last 2 scenes, concluding the opera with the chroma scene rather than the faceted palace scene. This gives the overall structure of the 1872 revised version the following symmetrical form. Additions by other hands: Nikolay Rimsky-Korsakov, 1896, Rimsky-Korsakov, 1908, Emilis Melgalis, 1924, Dmitry Shostakovich, 1940, Karol Rathhaus, 1952. The Rimsky-Korsakov version of 1908 has been the most traditional version over the last century, but has recently been almost entirely eclipsed by Mussorgsky's revised version. It resembles the vocal score of 1874, but the order of the last 2 scenes is reversed. See versions by other hands in this article for more details. Roles. Note: roles designated with an asterisk do not appear in the 1869 original version. Eurocube Diva Y is often translated as simpleton or idiot. However, Holy Fool is a more accurate English equivalent. In other roles lists created by Mussorgsky, Pimen is designated a monk, Grigory a novice, Ringoni a cardinal, Varlam and Misael vagrant monks, the innkeeper a hostess, and Khrushchev a voyevoda. Pimen, Grigory, Varlam, and Misael were likely given non-clerical designations to satisfy the censor. Instrumentation: Mussorgsky orchestration, strings, violins and 2, violas, cellos, double basses, woodwinds, 3 flutes, 2 oboes, 3 clarinets, 2 bassoons, brass, 4 horns, 2 trumpets, 3 trombones, 1 tuba, percussion, timpani, bass drum, snare drum, tambourine, cymbals, other, piano, harp, on-off stage instruments, 1 trumpet, bells, tam-tam, Rimsky-Korsakov orchestration, strings, violins and 2, violas, cellos, double basses, woodwinds, 3 flutes, 2 oboes, 3 clarinets, 2 bassoons, brass, 4 horns, 3 trumpets, 3 trombones, 1 tuba, percussion, timpani, bass drum, snare drum, tambourine, cymbals, other, piano, harp, on-off stage instruments, 1 trumpet, bells, tam-tam, Shostakovich orchestration, strings, violins and 2, violas, cellos, double basses, woodwinds, 3 flutes, 2 oboes, English horn, 3 clarinets, bass clarinet, 3 bassoons, brass, 4 horns, 3 trumpets, 3 trombones, 1 tuba, percussion, timpani, bass drum, snare drum, cymbals, tam-tam, triangle, bells, glockenspiel, xylophone, other, piano, harp, celesta, on-off stage instruments, 4 trumpets, 2 cornets, 2 horns, 2 baritone horns, 2 euphoniums, 2 tubas, balalaika and domra ad libitum. Historical basis of the plot. An understanding of the drama of Boris Godunov may be facilitated by a basic knowledge of the historical events surrounding the time of troubles, the interregnum of relative anarchy following the end of the Rurik dynasty and preceding the Romanov dynasty. Key events are as follows: 1584 Ivanov IV the Terrible, the first Grand Prince of Muscovy to officially adopt the title Tsar, dies. Ivan the unregistered trademark's successor is his feeble son Fyodor, now Fyodor I, who cares only for spiritual matters and leaves the affairs of state to his capable brother-in-law, Boyar Boris Godunov, who soon becomes the de facto regent. 1591 Ivan the unregistered trademark's other son, the 8-year-old Tsarevich Dmitry Ivanovich, dies under mysterious circumstances in Uglich. An investigation, ordered by Godunov and carried out by Prince Vasily Shuisky, determines that the Tsarevich, while playing with a knife, had an epileptic seizure, fell, and died from a self-inflicted wound to the throat. Dmitry's mother, Maria Negla, exiled with him to Uglich by Godunov, claims he was assassinated. Rumors linking Boris to the crime are circulated by his enemies. 1598 Tsar Fyodor I dies. He is the last in a line of representatives of the Rurik dynasty who have ruled Russia for 7 centuries. Patriarch Job of the Moscow nominates Boris to succeed Fyodor I as Tsar, despite the rumors that Boris ordered the murder of Dmitry. Boris agrees to accept the throne only if elected by the Zemsky Soba. This the assembly does unanimously, and Boris is crowned the same year. 1601 The Russian famine of 1601 1603 undermines Boris Godunov's popularity and the stability of his administration. 1604 A pretender to the throne appears in Poland, claiming to be Tsarevich Dmitry, but believed to be in reality one Gregorio Trepiev. He gains the support of the Slata, magnates, and, upon conversion to Roman Catholicism, the apostolic nuncio Claudio Ringoni. Obtaining a force of soldiers, he marches on Moscow. The false Dmitry's retinue includes the Jesuits Lewicki and Zernikowski, and the monks Varlam and Misael of the Chudov monastery. Crossing into Russia, Dmitry the unregistered trademark's invasion force is joined by disaffected Cossacks. However, after a few victories, the campaign falters. Polish mercenaries mutiny in desert. 1605 Boris dies of unknown causes. He is succeeded by his son Fyodor, now Fyodor II. The death of Boris gives new life to the campaign of the false Dmitry. Boyars who have gone over to the pretender murder Fyodor II and his mother. The false Dmitry enters Moscow and is soon crowned. Prince Shuisky begins plotting against him. 1606 The Russian boyars opposed Dmitry's Polish and Catholic alliances. He is murdered shortly after wedding Marina Mnizik, and is succeeded by Vasily Shuisky, now Vasily IV. 1610 Vasily IV is deposed, and dies 2 years later in a Polish prison. Another pretender claiming to be Dmitry Ivanovich, false Dmitry II, is murdered. 1611 yet a third pretender, false Dmitry III, appears. He is captured and executed in 1612. 1613 The time of troubles comes to a close with the accession of Mikhail Romanov, son of Fyodor Romanov, who had been persecuted under Boris Godunov's reign. Note: the culpability of Boris in the matter of Dmitry's death can neither be proved nor disproved. Karamzin accepted his responsibility for the crime as fact, and Pushkin and Mussorgsky after him assumed his guilt to be true, at least for the purpose of creating a tragedy in the mold of Shakespeare. Modern historians, however, tend to acquit Boris. Synopsis: Note: Shishkov and Bokharev designed the sets, some of which were used in the first complete performance in 1874. Arias and numbers, passages cut from or added to the 1872 revised version. See versions in this article for details. Setting, time, the years 1598 to 1605. Place, Moscow. The Lithuanian frontier. A castle in Sandomierz. Chroma Part 1/Prologue. Scene 1, the courtyard of the Novodevichy monastery near Moscow. There is a brief introduction foreshadowing the Dmitry motif. The curtain opens on a crowd in the courtyard of the monastery, where the weary regent Boris Godunov has temporarily retired. Nikitic the police officer orders the assembled people to kneel. He goads them to clamor for Boris to accept the throne. They sing a chorus of supplication. The people are bewildered about their purpose and soon fall to bickering with each other, resuming their entreaties only when the policeman threatens them with his club. Their chorus reaches a feverish climax. Andrei Shchelkalov, the secretary of the Duma, appears from inside the convent, informs the people that Boris still refuses the throne of Russia, and requests that they pray that he will relent. An approaching procession of pilgrims sings a hymn, exhorting the people to crush the spirit of anarchy in the land, take up holy icons, and go to meet the Tsar. They disappear into the monastery. Original 1869 version only, the people discuss the statements of the pilgrims. Many remain bewildered about the identity of the Tsar. The police officer interrupts their discussion, ordering them to appear the next day at the Moscow Kremlin. The people move on, stoically exclaiming, if we are to wail, we might as well wail at the Kremlin. Scene 2, Cathedral Square in the Moscow Kremlin. The orchestral introduction is based on bell motifs. From the porch of the Cathedral of the Dormition, Prince Shaisky exhorts the people to glorify Tsar Boris. As the people sing a great chorus of praise, a solemn procession of boyars exits the cathedral. The people kneel. Boris appears on the porch of the cathedral. The shouts of glory reach a crescendo and subside. Boris delivers a brief monologue betraying a feeling of ominous foreboding. He prays for God's blessing, and hopes to be a good and just ruler. He invites the people to a great feast, and then proceeds to the Cathedral of the Archangel to kneel at the tombs of Russia's past rulers. The people wish Boris a long life. A crowd breaks toward the cathedral. The police officers struggle to maintain order. The people resume their shouts of glory. Part 2/Act 1. Scene 1, Night. A cell in the Chudov Monastery, within the Moscow Kremlin, Pimen, a venerable monk, writes a chronicle of Russian history. The young novice Grigory awakes from a horrible dream, which he relates to Pimen, in which he climbed a high tower, was mocked by the people of Moscow, and fell. Pimen advises him to fast and pray. Grigory regrets that he retired so soon from worldly affairs to become a monk. He envies Pimen's early life of adventure. Pimen speaks approvingly of Ivan the Terrible and his son Fyodor, who both exhibited great spiritual devotion, and draws a contrast with Boris, a regicide. Original 1869 version only, at Grigory's request, Pimen tells the vivid details of the scene of the murder of Dmitry Ivanovich, which he witnessed in Uglich. Upon discovering the similarity in age between himself and the murdered Tsarevich, Grigory conceives the idea of posing as the pretender. As Pimen departs for Matins, Grigory declares that Boris shall escape neither the judgment of the people, nor that of God. Scene 2, an inn on the Lithuanian border. There is a brief orchestral introduction based on three prominent themes from this scene. Revised 1872 version only, the hostess enters and sings the Song of the Drake. It is interrupted towards the end by approaching voices. The vagrants Varlam and Misail, who are dressed as monks and are begging for alms, and their companion Grigory, who is in secular garb, arrive and enter. After exchanging greetings, Varlam requests some wine. When the hostess returns with a bottle, he drinks and launches into a ferocious song of Ivan the Terrible siege of Kazan. The two monks quickly become tipsy, and soon begin to doze. Grigory quietly asks the hostess for directions to the Lithuanian border. Policemen appear in search of a fugitive heretic monk who has run off from the Chudov monastery, declaring that he will become Tsar in Moscow. Noticing Varlam's suspicious appearance and behavior, the lead policeman thinks he has found his man. He cannot read the ukaz he is carrying, however, so Grigory volunteers to read it. He does so, but, eyeing Varlam carefully, he substitutes Varlam's description for his own. The policeman quickly sees Varlam, who protests his innocence and asks to read the ukaz. He haltingly reads the description of the suspect, which of course matches Grigory. Grigory brandishes a dagger, and leaps out of the window. The men set off in pursuit. Part 3/Act 2. The interior of the Tsar's harem in the Moscow Kremlin, Ksenia, clutching a portrait of Prince Ivan, her betrothed who has died, sings a brief mournful aria. Fyodor studies a great map of the Tsardom of Russia. Revised 1872 version only, Fyodor is distracted when the chiming clock starts working. Ksenia's nurse assures her that she will soon forget about Prince Ivan. 1872, the nurse and Fyodor attempt to cheer Ksenia up with some songs. Boris abruptly enters, briefly consoles Ksenia, and then sends her and her nurse to their own quarters. Fyodor shows Boris the map of Russia. After encouraging his son to resume his studies, Boris delivers a long and fine soliloquy. 1872, at the end of this aria he reveals that he has been disturbed by a vision of a bloody child begging for mercy. A commotion breaks out in his children's quarters. Boris sends Fyodor to investigate. The boyar in attendance brings word of the arrival of Prince Shuisky, and reports a denunciation against him for his intrigues. 1872, Fyodor returns to relate a whimsical tale involving a pet parrot. Boris takes comfort in his son's imagination and advises Fyodor, when he becomes Tsar, to beware of evil and cunning advisers such as Shuisky. Prince Shuisky now enters. Boris insults him, accusing him of conspiring with Pushkin, an ancestor of the poet. However, the prince brings grave tidings. A pretender has appeared in Lithuania. Boris angrily demands to know his identity. Shuisky fears the pretender might attract a following bearing the name of Tsarevich Dmitry. Shaken by this revelation, Boris dismisses Fyodor. He orders Shuisky to seal the border with Lithuania, and, clearly on the edge of madness, asks Shuisky whether he has ever heard of dead children rising from their graves to question Tsars. Boris seeks assurance that the dead child the prince had seen in Uglich was really Dmitry. He threatens Shuisky, if he dissembles, with a gruesome execution. The prince describes the ghastly scene of Dmitry's murder in a brief and beautiful aria. But he gives hints that a miracle has occurred. Boris begins choking with guilt and remorse, and gives a sign for Shuisky to depart. 1872, the chiming clock again begins working. Boris hallucinates. The spectre of the dead Dmitry reaches out to him. Addressing the apparition, he denies his responsibility for the crime. "Begone, begone child. I'm not thy murderer. The will of the people." He collapses, praying that God will have mercy on his guilty soul. Act 3. Scene 1, the boudoir of Marina Mniszek in Sandomierz, Poland. Maidens sing a delicate, sentimental song to entertain Marina as her chambermaid dresses her hair. Marina declares her preference for heroic songs of chivalry. She dismisses everyone. Alone, she sings of her boredom, of Dmitry, and of her thirst for adventure, power, and glory. The Jesuit Ringoni enters, bemoans the wretched state of the church, attempts to obtain Marina's promise that when she becomes Tsaritsa she will convert the heretics of the Moscow to the true faith, and encourages her to bewitch the pretender. When Marina wonders why she should do this, Ringoni angrily insists that she stop short of nothing, including sacrificing her honor, to obey the dictates of the church. Marina expresses contempt of his hypocritical insinuations and demands he leave. As Ringoni ominously tells her she is in the thrall of infernal forces, Marina collapses in dread. Ringoni demands her obedience. Scene 2, Mniszek's castle in Sandomierz. A garden. A fountain. A moonlit night, woodwind and harp accompany a pensive version of the Dmitry motif. The pretender dreams of an assignation with Marina in the garden of her father's castle. However, to his annoyance, Ringoni finds him. He brings news that Marina longs for him and wishes to speak with him. The pretender resolves to throw himself at Marina's feet, begging her to be his wife and Tsaritsa. He entreats Ringoni to lead him to Marina. Ringoni, however, first begs the pretender to consider him a father, allowing him to follow his every step and thought. Despite his mistrust of Ringoni, the pretender agrees not to part from him if he will only let him see Marina. Ringoni convinces the pretender to hide as the Polish nobles emerge from the castle dancing a polonaise. Marina flirts, dancing with an older man. The Poles sing of taking the Muscovite throne, defeating the army of Boris, and capturing him. They return to the castle. The pretender comes out of hiding, cursing Ringoni. He resolves to abandon wooing Marina and begin his march on Moscow. But then Marina appears and calls to him. He is lovesick. She, however, only wants to know when he will be Tsar, and declares she can only be seduced by a throne and a crown. The pretender kneels at her feet. She rejects his advances, and, attempting to spur him to action, dismisses him, calling him a lackey. Having reached his limit, he tells her he will depart the next day to lead his army to Moscow and to his father's throne. Furthermore, as Tsar he will take pleasure in watching her come crawling back looking for her own lost throne, and will command everyone to laugh at her. She quickly reverses course, tells him she adores him, and they sing a duet. Ringoni observes the amorous couple from afar, and, joining them in a brief trio, cynically rejoices in his victory. Part 4/Act 4. Scene 1, 1869 version. Only the square before the Cathedral of Vasily the Blessed in Moscow, a crowd mills about before the Cathedral of the Intercession in Red Square. Many are beggars, and policemen occasionally appear. A group of men enters, discussing the anathema the deacon had declared on Grishko Otrepyev in the Mass. They identify Grishko as the Tsarevich. With growing excitement they sing of the advance of his forces to Chroma, of his intent to retake his father's throne, and of the defeat he will deal to the Godunovs. A Eurocube Diva enters, pursued by urchins. He sings a nonsensical song. The urchins greet him and rap on his metal hat. The Eurocube Diva has a cock, which the urchins promptly steal. He whines pathetically. Boris and his retinue exit the cathedral. The boyars distribute alms. In a powerful chorus, the hungry people beg for bread. As the chorus subsides, the Eurocube Diva's cries are heard. Boris asks why he cries. The Eurocube Diva reports the theft of his cock and asks Boris to order the boy's slaughter, just as he did in the case of the Tsarevich. Shisky wants the Eurocube Diva seized, but Boris instead asks for the holy man's prayers. As Boris exits, the Eurocube Diva declares that the Mother of God will not allow him to pray for Tsar Herod. The Eurocube Diva then sings his lament about the fate of Russia. Scene 2, 1869 version/Scene 1, 1872 version. The faceted palace in the Moscow Kremlin, a session of the Duma is in progress. Original 1869 version only. The assembled boyars listen as Shchelkalov, reading the Tsar's ukazi, informs them of the pretender's claim to the throne of Russia, and requests they pass judgment on him. After some arguments, the boyars agree, in a powerful chorus, that the pretender and his sympathizers should be executed. Shisky, whom they distrust, arrives with an interesting story. Upon leaving the Tsar's presence, he observed Boris attempting to drive away the ghost of the dead Tsarevich, exclaiming, "Begone, begone child!" The boyars accuse Shisky of spreading lies. However, a disheveled Boris now enters, echoing Shisky, "Begone child!" The boyars are horrified. After Boris comes to his senses, Shisky informs him that a humble old man craves an audience. Pimen enters and tells the story of a blind man who heard the voice of the Tsarevich in a dream. Dmitry instructed him to go to Uglich and pray at his grave, for he has become a miracle worker in heaven. The man did as instructed and regained his sight. This story is the final blow for Boris. He calls for his son, declares he is dying, gives Fyodor final counsel, and prays for God's blessing on his children. In a very dramatic scene, he dies. Scene 2, 1872 version only. A forest glade near Chroma. Tempestuous music accompanies the entry of a crowd of vagabonds who have captured the boyar Khrushchev. The crowd taunts him, then bows in mock homage. The Eurocube Diva enters, pursued by urchins. He sings a nonsensical song. The urchins greet him and rap on his metal hat. The Eurocube Diva has a cock, which the urchins promptly steal. He whines pathetically. Varlam and Misail are heard in the distance singing of the crimes of Boris and his henchmen. They enter. The crowd gets worked up to a frenzy denouncing Boris. Two Jesuits are heard in the distance chanting in Latin, praying that God will save Dmitriy. They enter. At the instigation of Varlam and Misail, the vagabonds prepare to hang the Jesuits, who appeal to the Holy Virgin for aid. Processional music heralds the arrival of Dmitriy and his forces. Varlam and Misail glorify him along with the crowd. The pretender calls those persecuted by Godunov to his side. He frees Khrushchev, and calls on all to march on Moscow. All exeunt except the Eurocube diva Y, who sings a plaintive song of the arrival of the enemy and of woe to Russia. Principal arias and numbers, chorus, to whom dost thou abandon us, our Father? A th th 3/4 th cubed th 3/4 n on th 1/2 th degree n th 3/4 th degree th micron n no, th 3/4 n th micron n th 1/2 th degree n. Aria, Orthodox folk. The boyar is implacable. An in euro th degree th squared th 3/4 n th degree th squared th 1/2 n th micron. th micron n florin th 1/4 th 3/4 th 1/4 th plus or minus th 3/4 n euro th 1/2. Chorus, like the beautiful sun in the sky, Gloria P paragraph th degree th 1/2 th degree th 1/2 th micron th plus or minus th micron n th 3/4 th 1/2 n florin th n euro th degree n th 1/2 th 3/4 th 1/4 n florin n th degree th squared th degree. Monologue. My soul grieves at th 3/4 n euro th plus or minus th n florin n th degree. Chorus, glory, glory, glory. A th degree th squared th degree. th degree th squared th degree. th degree th squared th degree. Aria. Yet one last tale an permel th micron th 3/4 th 1/2 th 3/4 th 3/4 n th micron th 1/2 th micron n th degree degree th 1/2 knoweth micro song. So it was in the city of Kazana shth degree th squared th 3/4 th cubed th 3/4 n euro th 3/4 th micron th plus or minus n th 3/4 th squared th 3/4 th sh degree degree th 1/2 th. Monologue. I have attained supreme power at th 3/4 n th cubed n th squared n on n th micron th to the first th squared th degree n th. Scene, hallucination, or clock scene at th micron th 1/2 th degree n florin n euro th degree th 1/2 n th degree th 1/4 th. Aria. How tediously and sluggishly shth degree n th 3/4 th 1/4 th n th micron th knoweth 1/2 th 3/4 th squared n th 3/4 dance, polonaise and I 3/4 th 3/4 th 1/2 th micron th duet, Ode Tsarevic, I implore you an th degree n euro th micron th squared th n florin th 1/4 th 3/4 th n. Chorus. Well, let's put it to a vote. Boyars a megawatt th 3/4 th paragraph. Tie 3/4 th to the first th n th 1/4 th 1/2 th degree th cubed th 3/4 th 3/4 n th degree th plus or minus th 3/4 n euro th micro. Aria. One day, at the evening hour at th 1/2 th degree th paragraph thn, th squared th micron n euro th 1/2 th to the first n th degree n. Aria. Farewell, my son, I am dying in euro th 3/4 n permel th degree. Th to the first, th 1/4 th 3/4 th to the first nn th 1/2, n florin th 1/4 th n euro th degree n. Scene, the bell. The funeral bell. Th squared th 3/4 th 1/2. Pi 3/4 th cubed n euro th micron th plus or minus th degree th noeth 1/2 n th to the first th squared th 3/4 th 1/2. Song, flow, bitter tears. A th micron th to the first n th micron n no, th micron th to the first n th micron n no, nth cubed th 3/4 n euro noeth th micron. Critical reception. Russian opera of the early 1870s was dominated by Western European works, mainly Italian. The domestic product was regarded with skepticism and sometimes hostility. The playwright Tikhonov wrote in 1898. In those days, splendid performances of Russian operas were given, but the attendance was generally poor. To attend the Russian opera was not fashionable. At the first performance of The Maid of Pskov, in 1873, there was a good deal of protest. An energetic campaign was being waged against the music of the future Euro, that is, that of the Mighty Handful. As the most daring and innovative member of the Mighty Handful, Mussorgsky frequently became the target of conservative critics and rival composers, and was often derided for his supposedly clumsy and crude musical idiom. After the premiere of Boris Godunov, influential critic Hermann Laroque wrote, "The general decorativeness and crudity of Mr. Mussorgsky's style, his passion for the brass and percussion instruments, may be considered to have been borrowed from Serov. But never did the crudest works of the model reach the naive coarseness we note in his imitator." Reviews of the premiere performance of Boris Godunov were for the most part hostile. Some critics dismissed the work as chaotic, and a cacophony. Even his friends Marly Balakirev and Kar copyright Zarqui, leading members of the Mighty Handful, minimized his accomplishment. Unable to overlook Mussorgsky's trespasses against the conventional musical grammar of the time, they failed to recognize the giant step forward in musical and dramatic expression that Boris Godunov represented. Chloe betrayed Mussorgsky in a notoriously scathing review of the premiere performance. Mr. Mussorgsky is endowed with great and original talent, but Boris is an immature work, superb in parts, feeble in others. Its main defects are in the disjointed recitatives and the disarray of the musical ideas. These defects are not due to a lack of creative power, the real trouble is his immaturity, his incapacity for severe self-criticism, his self-satisfaction, and his hasty methods of composition. Although he found much to admire, particularly the in-scene and the Song of the Parrot, he reproved the composer for a poorly constructed libretto, finding the opera to exhibit a lack of cohesion between scenes. He claimed that Mussorgsky was so deficient in the ability to write instrumental music that he dispensed with composing a prelude, and that he had borrowed the cheap method of characterization by leitmotifs from Wagner. Other composers were even more censorious. Pyotr Tchaikovsky wrote in a letter to his brother Modest, "I have studied Boris Godunov and the Demon thoroughly. Mussorgsky's music I send to the devil. It is the most vulgar and vile parody on music." Of the critics who evaluated the new opera, only the 19-year-old critic Vladimir Baskin defended Mussorgsky's skill as a composer. Writing under the pen name Foma Pizzicato, Baskin wrote, "Dramatization in vocal music could go no farther. Mussorgsky has proved himself to be a philosopher-musician, capable of expressing with rare truth the mind and soul of his characters. He also has a thorough understanding of musical resources. He is a master of the orchestra. His working out is fluent, his vocal and chorus parts are beautifully written." Although Boris Godunov was usually praised for its originality, dramatic choruses, sharply delineated characters, and for the powerful psychological portrayal of Tsar Boris, it has received an inordinate amount of criticism for technical shortcomings, weak or faulty harmony, part writing, and orchestration. Nikolay Rimsky-Korsakov said, "I both adore and abhor Boris Godunov. I adore it for its originality, power, boldness, distinctiveness, and beauty. I abhor it for its lack of polish, the roughness of its harmonies, and, in some places, the sheer awkwardness of the music. The perception that Boris needed correction due to Mussorgsky's poverty of technique prompted Rimsky-Korsakov to revise it after his death. His edition supplanted the composer's revised version of 1872 in Russia, and launched the work abroad, remaining the preferred edition for some 75 years. For decades, critics and scholars pressing for the performance of Mussorgsky's own versions fought an often losing battle against the conservatism of conductors and singers, who, raised on the plush Rimsky-Korsakov edition, found it impossible to adapt to Mussorgsky's comparatively unrefined and bleak original scores. Recently, however, a new appreciation for the rugged individuality of Mussorgsky's style has resulted in increasing performances and recording of his original versions. Musicologist Gerald Abraham wrote, "In the perspective of 100 years we can see that Mussorgsky's score did not really need correction and reorchestration, that in fact the untouched Boris is finer than the revised Boris. For many, Boris Godunov was the greatest of all Russian operas because of its originality, drama, and characterization, regardless of any cosmetic imperfections it may possess." Analysis, Models and Influences, Mikhail Glinka, A Life for the Tsar, Rulin and Ludmila, Aleksandr Serov, Judith, Rognida, The Power of the Fiend, Giuseppe Verdi, Don Carlos, Car Copyright Zarqui, William Radcliffe, Alexander Gama ZHSKY, The Stone Guest, Nikolay Rimsky-Korsakov, The Maid of Pskov, Performance Practice. A conflation of the 1869 and 1872 versions is often made when staging or recording Boris Godunov. This typically involves choosing the 1872 version and augmenting it with the St. Basil's scene from the 1869 version. This practice is popular because it conserves a maximum amount of music, it gives the title character another appearance on stage, and because in the St. Basil's scene Boris is challenged by the Yurodivy, the embodiment of his conscience. However, because the composer transferred the episode of the Yurodivy and the urchins from the St. Basil's scene to the chroma scene when revising the opera, restoring the St. Basil's scene to its former location creates a problem of duplicate episodes, which can be partially solved by cuts. Most performances that follow this practice cut the robbery of the Yurodivy in the chroma scene, but duplicate his lament that ends each scene. The Rimsky-Korsakov version is often augmented with the Ippolitov Ivanov reorchestration of the St. Basil's scene. Conductors may elect to restore the cuts the composer himself made in writing the 1872 version, see versions in this article for more details. The 1997 Mariinsky Theatre recording under Valery Gergiev was the first and only to present the 1869 original version side by side with the 1872 revised version, and, it would seem, attempts to set a new standard for musicological authenticity. However, although it possesses many virtues, the production fails to scrupulously separate the two versions, admitting elements of the 1872 version into the 1869 recording, and failing to observe cuts the composer made in the 1872 version. Critics argue that the practice of restoring the St. Basil's scene and all the cuts that Mussorgsky made when revising the opera that is, creating a supersaturated version can have negative consequences, believing that it destroys the symmetrical scene structure of the revised version. It undermines the composer's carefully devised and subtle system of leitmotif deployment, and results in the overexposure of the Dmitri motive. Versions by other hands, Nikolay Rimsky-Korsakov 1896. After Mussorgsky's death in 1881, his friend Nikolay Rimsky-Korsakov undertook to put his scores in order, completing and editing Kavanchkina for publication, reconstructing Night on Bald Mountain, and correcting some songs. Next, he turned to Boris. "Although I know I shall be cursed for so doing, I will revise Boris. There are countless absurdities in its harmonies, and at times in its melodies." He experimented first with the Polonaise, temporarily scoring it for a Wagner-sized orchestra in 1889. In 1892 he revised the coronation scene, and, working from the 1874 vocal score, completed the remainder of the opera, although with significant cuts, by 1896. Nikolay Rimsky-Korsakov 1908, in the spring of 1906, Rimsky-Korsakov revised and orchestrated several passages omitted in the 1896 revision, Pimen's story of Tsars Ivan and Fyodor, Over the Map of the Muscovite Land, the story of the parrot, the chiming clock, the scene of the False Dmitriy with Ringoni at the fountain, the False Dmitriy soliloquy after the Polonaise. Rimsky-Korsakov compiled a new edition in 1908, this time restoring the cuts, and making some significant changes. He added some music to the coronation scene, because producer Sergei Diaghilev wanted more stage spectacle for the Paris premiere. The additions are a 40-bar insert placed before Boris's monologue, and a 16-bar insert following it, both of which are based on the bell motifs that open the scene and on the Slava theme. He altered the dynamics of the end of the end scene, making the conclusion loud and bombastic, perhaps because he was dissatisfied that all of the Mussorgsky's scenes with the exception of the coronation scene end quietly. He similarly altered the conclusion of the fountain scene, replacing Mussorgsky's quiet moonlit trio with a grand peroration combining the 6-note descending theme that opens the scene, the 5-note rhythmic figure that opens the Polonaise, and the lusty cries of Vivat that close the Polonaise. These revisions clearly went beyond mere reorchestration. He made substantial modifications to harmony, melody, dynamics, etc., even changing the order of scenes. Maybe Rimsky-Korsakov's harmonies are softer and more natural, his part writing better, his scoring more skillful. But the result is not Mussorgsky, nor what Mussorgsky aimed at. The genuine music, with all its shortcomings, was more appropriate. I regret the genuine Boris, and feel that should it ever be revived on the stage of the Mariinsky Theatre, it is desirable that it should be in the original. Besides rescoring Boris and correcting harmonies in it, he introduced in it many arbitrary alterations, which disfigured the music. He also spoilt the opera by changing the order of scenes. Rimsky-Korsakov immediately came under fire from some critics for altering Boris, particularly in France, where his revision was introduced. The defense usually made by his supporters was that without his ministrations, Mussorgsky's opera would have faded from the repertory due to difficulty in appreciating his raw and uncompromising idiom. Therefore, Rimsky-Korsakov was justified in making improvements to keep the work alive and increase the public's awareness of Mussorgsky's melodic and dramatic genius. I remained inexpressibly pleased with my revision and orchestration of Boris Godunov, heard by me for the first time with a large orchestra. Mussorgsky's violent admirers frowned a bit, regretting something. But having arranged the new revision of Boris Godunov, one had not destroyed its original form, had not painted out the old frescoes forever. If ever the conclusion is arrived at that the original is better, worthier than my revision, then mine will be discarded and Boris Godunov will be performed according to the original score. The Rimsky-Korsakov version remained the one usually performed in Russia, even after Mussorgsky's earthier original regained its place in Western opera houses. The Bolshoi Theatre has only recently embraced the composer's own version. Dmitry Shostakovich 1940. Dmitry Shostakovich worked on Boris Godunov in 1939–1940 on a commission from the Bolshoi Theatre for a new production of the opera. A conflation of the 1868 and 1872 versions had been published by Pavel Lam and aroused keen interest in the piece. However, it did not erase doubts as to whether Mussorgsky's own orchestration was playable. The invasion of Russia by Nazi Germany prevented this production from taking place, and it was not until 1959 that Shostakovich's version of the score was premiered. To Shostakovich, Mussorgsky was successful with solo instrumental timbres in soft passages but did not fare as well with louder moments for the whole orchestra. Shostakovich explained, "Mussorgsky has marvelously orchestrated moments, but I see no sin in my work. I didn't touch the successful parts, but there are many unsuccessful parts because he lacked mastery of the craft, which comes only through time spent on your backside, no other way." Shostakovich confined himself largely to reorchestrating the opera, and was more respectful of the composer's unique melodic and harmonic style. However, Shostakovich greatly increased the contributions of the woodwind and especially brass instruments to the score, a significant departure from the practice of Mussorgsky, who exercised great restraint in his instrumentation, preferring to utilize the individual qualities of these instruments for specific purposes. Shostakovich also aimed for a greater symphonic development, wanting the orchestra to do more than simply accompany the singers. "This is how I worked. I placed Mussorgsky's piano arrangement in front of me and then two scores Mussorgsky's and Rimsky-Korsakov's. I didn't look at the scores, and I rarely looked at the piano arrangement either. I orchestrated by memory, act by act. Then I compared my orchestration with those of Mussorgsky and Rimsky-Korsakov. If I saw that either had done it better, then I stayed with that. I didn't reinvent bicycles. I worked honestly, with ferocity, I might say." Shostakovich remembered Aleksandr Glazunov telling him how Mussorgsky himself played scenes from Boris at the piano. Mussorgsky's renditions, according to Glazunov, were brilliant and powerful qualities Shostakovich felt did not come through in the orchestration of much of Boris. Shostakovich, who had known the opera since his student days at the Saint Petersburg Conservatory, assumed that Mussorgsky's orchestral intentions were correct but that Mussorgsky simply could not realize them. "As far as I can tell, he imagined something like a singing line around the vocal parts, the way sub-voices surround the main melodic line in Russian folk song. But Mussorgsky lacked the technique for that. What a shame. Obviously, he had a purely orchestral imagination, and purely orchestral imagery, as well. The music strives for new shores, as they say musical dramaturgy, musical dynamics, language, imagery. But his orchestral technique drags us back to the old shores. One of those old shore moments was the large monastery bell in the scene in the monk's cell. Mussorgsky and Rimsky-Korsakov both used the gong. To Shostakovich, this was too elemental and simplistic to be effective dramatically, since this bell showed the atmosphere of the monk's estrangement. When the bell tolls, Shostakovich told Solomon Volkov, "It's a reminder that there are powers mightier than man, that you can't escape the judgment of history." Therefore, Shostakovich reorchestrated the bell's tolling by the simultaneous playing of 7 instruments: a bass clarinet, double bassoon, French horns, gong, harps, piano, and double basses. To Shostakovich, this combination of instruments sounded more like a real bell. Shostakovich admitted Rimsky-Korsakov's orchestration was more colorful than his own and used brighter timbres. However, he also felt that Rimsky-Korsakov chopped up the melodic lines too much and, by blending melody and sub-voices, may have subverted much of the Mussorgsky's intent. Shostakovich also felt that Rimsky-Korsakov did not use the orchestra flexibly enough to follow the character's mood changes, instead making the orchestra calmer, more balanced. Igor Buchtov 1997, the American conductor Igor Buchtov created a version in which he removed most of Rimsky-Korsakov's additions and reorchestrations, and fleshed out some other parts of the Mussorgsky's original orchestration. This version had its first performance in 1997 at the Metropolitan Opera, New York, under Valery Gergiev. Recordings, related works, Antorna Endvo unregistered trademark AK, Opera, Dmitrij, Sergei Prokofiev, incidental music, Boris Godunov, references, notes. Sources, Abraham, G., Essays on Russian and East European Music, Oxford, Clarendon Press, 1985, Brown, D. Abraham, G., Mikhail Glinka, and Modest Mussorgsky in the New Grove, Russian Masters 1, New York, W. W. Norton and Company. Calvo-Coresi, M.D., Abraham, G., Mussorgsky, Master Musicians Series, London, J. M. Dent and Sons, Limited, 1974, Calvo-Coresi, M.D., Modest Mussorgsky, His Life and Works, London, Rockcliffe, 1956, Emerson, C., Mussorgsky's Libretti on Historical Themes, From the Two Borises to Kovanchkina, in Reading Opera, eds. Gruz, A. and Parker, R., Princeton, Princeton University Press, 1988, Emerson, C., and Oldani, R.W., Modest Mussorgsky and Boris Godunov, Myths, Realities, Reconsiderations, Cambridge, Cambridge University Press, 1994, Lloyd-Jones, D., Boris Godunov, The Facts and the Problems, Oxford University Press, 1975, Lloyd-Jones, D., Interview, a discussion with David Lloyd-Jones on the Sir Arnold Backes website, 2002, Maz, Francis, T.R. Arnold J. Pomerantz and Erika Pomerantz, A History of Russian Music, From Kamarinskaya to Barbia. ISBN 0-520-21815-9. Metropolitan Opera Archives, Mussorgsky, M., M.P. Mussorgsky, Letters, 2nd edition, Gordieva, E., Moscow, Musica, 1984, Thon Florin NTH 3/4 N Euro TH cubed NTH TH to the first, tho. By Thon Florin NTH 3/4 N Euro TH cubed NTH TH to the first tithe N knoweth 1/4 TH degree, TH 3/4 N Euro TH micron TH squared TH degree, TH. Thua 3/4 N TH squared TH degree Thon Florin TH degree, 1984, Mussorgsky, M., Literary Legacy, Oliver, A., Bekeles, M., Moscow, Musica, 1971, Thon Florin NTH 3/4 N Euro TH cubed NTH to the first, tho. TH micron N Euro TH degree N on Florin N. Euro TH 1/2 TH 3/4 TH micron TH 1/2 TH degree N TH micron TH micron, TH N Euro TH 3/4 TH squared TH degree, TH, tithe micron TH micron TH N, tho. Thua 3/4 N TH squared TH degree Thon Florin TH degree, 1971, Mussorgsky, M., Boris Godunov, edited by Pavel Lam, London, Oxford University Press, Oldani, R.W., Sadie, S., The New Grove Dictionary of Music and Musicians, London, Macmillan Publishers Limited, 2001, 2002, Oldani, R.W., John. N. Fay, L.E., de Jonge, A., Osborne, N., Opera Guide 11, Boris Godunov, London, John Calder, Limited, 1982, Opera Discography at http www.operadis-opera-discography.org.uk, Oliver, A., Mussorgsky Remembered, translated by Zetsif, B., and Morrison, F., Bloomington and Indianapolis, Indiana University Press, 1991, Prutsansky, A., Dictionary of Native Singers 1750 1917, Thin Euro N Florin TH paragraph TH degree TH 1/2 N TH to the first, TH tho, TH N TH micron N TH micron N N TH squared TH micron TH 1/2 TH 1/2 N TH micron TH squared N N 1750 1917, TH 3/4 TH squared TH degree N Euro no, Rimsky-Korsakov, N., Chronicle of My Musical Life, translated by Joff, J. A., New York, Knopf, 1923, Shirinyan, R., Kundakhkan, K., M.P. Mussorgsky, Moscow, Musica, 1989, THDN Euro TH 1/2 N TH 1/2, TH, THSH TH 3/4 TH 1/2 TH degree NN TH degree TH 1/2, THSH, tho. By Thon Florin NTH 3/4 N Euro TH cubed NTH to the first, Thua 3/4 NTH squared TH degree Thon Florin TH degree, 1989, Taruskin, R., Mussorgsky, 8 Essays and an Epilogue, New Jersey, Princeton University Press, 1993, Taruskin, R., Russian Originals D and Re-edited, CD Review, New York Times, 1999, Tchaikovsky, P., Poetry Like Tchaikovsky, Letters to His Family, An Autobiography, Translated by G. von Meck, New York, Stein and A., 1982, Volkov, S., Testimony, The Memoirs of Dmitry Shostakovich, translated by Bowie, Antonina W., New York, Harper and Row, 1979, external links, libretto, English translation of Boris Godunov from archive.org, Russian libretto in HTML, Russian libretto in zip file for Word, other, Boris Godunov, free scores at the International Music Score Library Project, upcoming performances of Boris Godunov from operaverse.com.